In Magic the Gathering, the crab creature type made its debut in 1997's Tempest with Giant Crab. This creature really sets the stage for what crabs have been for the most part throughout Magic's history. That is, a predominantly blue creature type that either has high toughness or an ability that makes them hard to kill, which makes sense, because crabs have hard shells. Most of Magic's crabs since then follow this model in one way or another. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have the crab creature type or be capable of making a crab creature token. In all, there were 46 cards eligible, and in this video we'll look at the 10 crabs that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic the Gathering. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours. And a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like Regional Championships. At number 10, it's Vexing Scuttler. This Eldrazi crab is 8 generic mana for a 4/5 with Emerge for 6 generic and a blue. Emerge is an alternate casting cost where you sacrifice a creature and pay the Emerge cost minus that creature's mana value. And when you cast a Scuttler, you can return an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. So this gives you a pretty big body and a spell back, although you're not going to feel like it's worth it unless you can set up Emerge. There was a standard deck that was all about doing that though, as you could give up relatively high mana value cards without really giving anything up, sacrificing creatures like Prized Amalgam, Stitchwing, Scab, and Advanced Stitchwing, all of who can easily come back from the graveyard. And when you're doing that, the Scuttler feels pretty good. However, it doesn't have any top 8 since 2017, and it's very likely that a future crab will take its spot on the list. At number 9, it's Crabomination, our second consecutive crab with Emerge, although this one was printed 7 years later, and it isn't an Eldrazi. Instead, it's a crab demon. For 4 generic and 2 black, it's a 5/5, and it has Emerged from Artifact for 5 generic and 2 black. And when it enters, target opponent exiles a top card of their library, a card at random from their graveyard, and a card at random from their hand. And you can cast a spell from among those cards without paying its mana cost. So this crab exiles 3 cards in total, including one straight up from their hand, and then it lets you cast one of those cards without paying any mana. While it's not guaranteed you'll get to cast something, there's a pretty good chance you do, since it exiles cards from 3 different zones, and if you're taking a card from your opponent's hand and casting it, that's especially sweet. Crabomination is from Modern Horizons 3, which means the only 60 card paper formats it's legal in are Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, and so far it's been played in a couple of different Modern decks, including artifact decks that can leverage the high mana value of affinity creatures like Frogmite to cast the crab way ahead of schedule. You can get Frogmite down in the very early game and sacrifice it to get Crabomination down quite early too. It's also seen some play in Reanimator decks, but so far it doesn't have any top 8s in 2025. At number 8, it's Iceberg Cancrix. For 1 generic and a blue, it's a 0/4 snow crab, and whenever another snow permanent enters under your control, you can have target player mill 2 cards. So if you have lots of snow stuff, you can use this either to try to mill your opponent out, or to load your own graveyard for value. One of the nice things about the Cancrix is that you can build a deck where all your lands will trigger it, while also having plenty of other permanents that will do it, so triggering this twice a turn is very much on the table. This crab is from the original Modern Horizons, but because it's a common, it's also legal in Pauper, a format where only commons are legal, and the format where the Cancrix has found all of its success. There it was played in Flicker combo decks that look to get Sunscape Familiar in play to reduce the cost of Ghostly Flicker. Once you have 2 familiars in play, as well as an Archaeomancer and the Cancrix, you can cast the Flicker for 1 blue and target an Archaeomancer and a Snow Island, allowing you to create a loop where you always get Flicker back with Archaeomancer and mill 2 cards every time thanks to the Snow Island. However, while the Cancrix has been used as a win condition in the deck from time to time, it has never become a regular feature in those decks, which have continued on in Pauper without this crab, and it doesn't have any top 8 since 2023. At number 7, it's Charix, the Raging Isle. This legendary Leviathan crab definitely got the memo about crabs having high toughness because it's 2 generic and 2 blue for a 0/17. He also makes it harder for your opponent to target him as they have to pay 2 generic more to cast spells that do. You can also pay 3 generic to give him +X/-X until end of turn, where X is the number of islands you control. So, this huge crab makes it a real pain to deal with it. Even the cheapest removal will usually cost at least 3 mana, and if they don't kill it, he represents not only a massive roadblock, but a potential win condition that can hit really hard when it needs to. Charix saw sideboard play in standard control decks, as there were legitimately decks in the field that had no way at all to kill this thing, like mono red, or if they could kill it, they'd need to spend a ton of mana to do it. However, Charix doesn't have any top 8 since 2021. At number 6, it's Growth Chamber Guardian, which is also an elf and a warrior, in addition to being a crab. For 1 generic and a green, it's a 2/2, and it has Adapt 2 for 2 generic and a green. This means if it has no +1/+1 counters on it, you can pay that cost to put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And whenever one or more counters are put on the Guardian, you get to search up another copy of the Guardian and put it into your hand. This is not the most impressive creature on its own, even with Adapt, but it gets a lot better when that Adapt ability also effectively says, draw a card, even when that card is just another copy of this Elf Crab Warrior. It can really allow aggressive green decks to keep pressure on the opponent, as it becomes a lot harder to run out of cards and creatures when the Guardian is around, and indeed, the Guardian's top 8s all came in standard mono green aggro decks. At number 5, it's Mirrorshell Crab. For 5 generic and 2 blue mana, it's a 5/7 artifact crab with ward 3, which is not a very good card, but it also has Channel, which means you can pay a cost and discard the crab for a spell-like effect. In this case, you can pay 2 generic and a blue and discard it to counter a spell or ability, unless its controller pays 3 generic mana. Yeah, that Channel ability is actually really good. Sure, if it was just the counterspell effect, it'd be a worse card, but there are a number of things going on here that make it far better than that. Most obviously, there's the fact that you can cast this as a creature in the late game, unlike most counterspells, but being a Channel ability also means that it's very difficult for your opponent to interact with it. Traditional counterspells can't do the job, because you're not casting a spell. Hitting activated abilities is some nice upside to have too. So this 7 mana 5/7 has actually seen play in every format it's ever been legal in apart from Vintage, which is quite the accomplishment. In Standard, it was played in 5-color control decks. In Pioneer, it's been played in Lotus Field decks, where it's a really good way to protect your combo, and it's also been played in Quintorius combo decks. It's a great fit there, because in order to combo off, those decks have to have Quintorius' Discover ability hit a clone, like Clever Impersonator or Spark Double. Either of those can copy Quintorius and the clone can discover again, and you keep doing that until you have a bunch of copies of him in play, at which point the discover triggers can kill your opponent thanks to Quintorius' static ability. However, in order for discover to always hit clones, you can't run any other cards in the deck with a mana value of 4 or less, and that's where Mirrorshell Crab comes in. Your discovers won't hit it, but it's still something you can use at 3 mana, which the deck really needs access to. It's also seen a bit of play in Modern Living Index, which can channel it early in the game, and then reanimate it with Living In and get access to that 5/7 body, and it's also played in Legacy Cascade decks, which, like Discover decks, need cards that are expensive, but can actually do something early, so as not to interfere with their combo. It's also been played in Pauper, where it appears in wall combo decks, which are mostly about tapping and untapping Axebane Guardian for a whole bunch of mana. Mirrorshell Crab doesn't really help you with that, but it does give you some interaction, and the deck also has lots of ways to recur creatures, like Reaping the Graves, meaning you can get the crab back and counter something else when you need to. Mirrorshell Crab is still active in both Pauper and Pioneer, and it has a pretty real shot at moving up the list in the future. At number 4, it's Hard Evidence. For 1 blue mana, it's a sorcery that makes a 0/3 crab token, and you investigate. That's some pretty great value for only 1 mana, as you get 2 permanents and can even cash one of them in for a full card. Hard Evidence was printed in Modern Horizons 2, so it's never been legal in formats like Standard or Pioneer, but it has seen significant play in both Historic and Modern. It's appeared in the same kind of deck in both formats, Indomitable Creativity. These decks don't run any actual creature cards other than big scary win conditions, like Atraxa, and the deck's whole plan is to make creature and artifact tokens, and then cast Creativity targeting them to put one of those win conditions into play way ahead of schedule. Hard Evidence is a pretty great turn 1 for the deck because it gives you 2 separate targets for Creativity, making it very likely you can turn one of those tokens into a huge scary creature. It's also played in Pauper Mono Blue Tempo decks, which run lots of creatures who love cheap spells like Tolarian Terror. It's still active in Pauper right now, but it seems like Mirrorshell Crab will pass Hard Evidence in the future. At number 3, it's Eddymurk Crab. This elemental crab costs 5 generic and 2 blue. It's a 5/5 with flash, and it costs 1 generic less to cast for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard. It enters tapped if it's not your turn, and when it enters, you tap up to 2 target creatures. Big creatures who reduce their cost when you have spells in the graveyard have a pretty impressive track record, and this one even comes with Flash. You can't ambush block your opponent with it, they made sure of that, but if you're a spell deck, having the flexibility to play this at instant speed alone is great, especially because it lets you tap stuff, which you can use to make sure they are defenseless, allowing the crab and friends to smash in for lots of damage when you untap. It's been very successful in Standard, where it's shown up in a lot of different spell decks, including those using Tolarian Terror and up to Beanstalk. The stock is great with the crab and other creatures and spells that reduce their cost, because even if you cast the crab for 2, you still get to draw a card off Beanstalk. More recently, it's been relegated to sideboard duty, as the format's spell decks have become far more aggressive as a result of Corey's Steelcutter. By the time this video comes out, it's fairly likely that at least one card from that deck has been banned, as they have been absolutely dominating the format for a while now, but that's probably good news for Eddymurk Crab, as it's likely to return to the main deck in the less aggro-oriented spell decks that are likely to emerge. Either way, the Crab is likely to continue to put up top 8s in Standard, and it isn't out of the question that it eventually becomes the number 1 card on this list. At number 2, it's Hedron Crab. For 1 blue mana, it's a 0/3, and when a land enters under your control, each opponent mills 3 cards. This is a 1-drop that can do an okay job protecting you, and in the meantime, it's likely dumping massive chunks of your opponent's library into the graveyard. It gets particularly potent in decks that can make multiple land drops in a turn, especially with multiple crabs in play. Unsurprisingly, Hedron Crab has seen play exclusively in dedicated mill decks. In Standard, it made its way into the rogue-oriented mill decks that use Soaring Thought Thief. It was so good at milling and enabling your rogues that it didn't really matter that it wasn't a rogue itself. It's been even more successful in Modern though, where its printing helped spawn mill decks in 2020. That format has access to a full complement of fetch lands, and making 2 land drops a turn is pretty easy. Those decks are still viable in the format right now, and that's partly a result of the number 1 card on the list too, which is Hedron Crab. I'm willing to bet most of you predicted this would be number 1, as it's almost certainly Magic's most iconic and well-known crab. For 1 blue mana, it's a 0/2, and whenever a land enters, target player mills 3 cards. The original mill crab, this card is the one that inspired both Hedron Crab and Iceberg Cancrix, which we saw earlier. At first glance, Hedron Crab might look worse than Hedron Crab. After all, it has 1 less toughness and a similar landfall trigger, but there's one big difference here. Hedron Crab can mill either player. So while Hedron Crab is fairly one-dimensional and only good at milling the opponent, Hedron Crab can also be used as an enabler in graveyard decks since it can mill so many cards for free. And indeed, before the printing of Hedron Crab in 2020, Hedron Crab was almost exclusively played in graveyard decks like Standard and Extended Dredge, and Modern and Legacy Hogak, where it was just used as a way to turbo a bunch of cards into the graveyard very quickly. And since 2020, Hedron Crab has been teaming up with Hedron Crab in Modern to quickly mill out the opponent. Hedron Crab is still active right now in Modern, and because it's pretty much joined at the hip with Hedron Crab, it's unlikely the number 2 crab can ever overtake Hedron Crab. So, those are Magic's best crabs. If you want to build a deck around some hard-shelled crustaceans, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to stay aware of future videos, don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at specific creature types, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.